Crafting a quartzite spear point, ancient traditions and nature's magic. I kneel by a clear forest creek in North America, fingers tracing the rough surface of a quartzite cobble I just pulled from the stream bed. The water's gentle murmur and the cool touch of the stone connect me to the deep past. For thousands of years on this continent and beyond, people crouched by similar rivers shaping such stones into tools for survival. As I prepare to craft a hunting spear point from this quartzite, the journey of this rock, born of sand and transformed by time and pressure, is about to continue in my hands, linking nature, history, and craftsmanship. Quartzite began as an ordinary sand grain, perhaps in an ancient river or beach, that over eons were buried and fused by heat and pressure into a single hard mass. In its pure form, quartzite is essentially quartz silica, tough, glassy, often sparkling in the sunlight. A good piece of quartzite can look like hardened sugar with crystals bonded tightly by the silica. This gives some varieties surprisingly excellent flaking qualities for tool making. There's a myth among modern rock hounders that quartzite is too grainy or not workable for flint knapping, but that's really far from the truth. Ancient artisans knew that with skill and patience, even coarse quartzite could be knapped into sharp-edged tools. In fact, certain fine-grained quartzites break with the same exact conchoidal fracture as flint or obsidian, meaning they could yield long, razor-sharp edged flakes. Metamorphic quartzite is exceptionally tough, but it can be percussion flaked into durable tools. And when you do manage to crack it, the edges are wicked sharp, often with microscopic serrations from the interlocking sand grains, almost little tooth-like edges ideal for cutting. Every strike on workable rock proves this old misconception wrong. The quartzite sings as each flake pops off, revealing a shiny new surface and the promise of a future arrowhead. Across North America, ancient people have been harnessing quartzite for millennia, especially when the other fine stones like flint and obsidian were not available. This seemingly humble creek stone carries the legacy of those ancient people, the ancient toolmakers. Some examples from history include in the eastern woodlands across the east coast. Ancient people began favoring the tough quartzite cobbles to make large, broad spearheads known as the Savannah River points. Archaeologists found that about 65% of the Savannah River spear points in some areas were made from quartzite, showing that the common, grainy rock was used for tools. These heavy points were shaped right where the stone was found, along the stream banks and hillsides. The quartzite cobbles were carried and chipped into rough oval blanks at sites like Rock Creek, near today's Washington, D.C. The quarry pits there are still littered with millions of flakes and tested stones, cobbles that the ancient knappers struck and discarded if they weren't good enough. From those blanks, toolmakers thinned and refined these pieces into lethal spearheads back at their camp, like I'm doing right here. It's awe-inspiring to think that on these very lands, thousands of years ago, someone stood by a creek selecting a quartzite cobble as I just did, intent on making a reliable hunting weapon. In what is now Alabama and Mississippi, ancient people prized a local quartzite so much that it earned a name, Tallahassee quartzite, meaning white rock. It comes from outcrops in the region that was commonly used for projectile points. They even quarried it in big blocks from the hilltops. They also gathered certain quartzite cobbles from the river gravel bars and shaped them into their tools. The stone is creamy white in tan and color, had fine grain and a strength that these ancient people needed. Each time a spear or an arrow point was chipped from Tallahassee, it reflected a connection between the people and the land's gifts. On the open plains of Wyoming lies an ancient quarry known as Spanish Diggings. a place that underscores how valued quartzite could be. There, starting at least 10 millennia ago, ancient people dug dozens of pits into a hilltop to mine a beautiful silica-rich orthoquartzite. They weren't after gold or silver, their treasure was the stone. Generation after generation of these ancient people returned to extract the fine-grained purple and brown quartzite from the ground. Archaeologists found huge piles of broken rock and half-finished bifaces left by these miners of old. The workflow was so intelligent, they pried the rocks of the best quartzite, knocked off all the flaws, percussion flaked the cores into disc-shaped blanks right on site. These roughly circular preforms could then easily be carried away and traded across the region. Artifacts of the Spanish diggings quartzite have been found hundreds of miles away, as far as Ohio and Indiana, carried along ancient trade routes by the nomadic hunters, ranging far from that quarry. Imagining the scene there is magical, the plains alive with the sounds of stone being struck. Tools were born from the living rock. By twilight, the hilltops would glow with campfires, surrounded by flakes, shining like scattered stars on the ground. What I'm doing here with the copper tools, just replace it with antler and hammerstones, and it would be very, very similar to how these ancient people did this. Knapping quartzite into an arrowhead or spear point is both a technical skill and an art, one that ancient people developed through trial, error, and a deep understanding of the stone they're working. As I'm striking this quartzite cobble, I'm reenacting a process that was virtually unchanged for 2.5 million years across the planet, all of human history. The same fundamental technology used by the very first toolmakers. Here's how ancient knappers and I followed in their footsteps, turning a raw rock into a refined point. The first step is selecting the stone. Not every rock is equal. Toolmakers learn to identify the good tool stone by how it looks and how it feels and how it sounds when you're hitting it. A fine, uniform grain and a glassy ring when tapped. Ancient people in North America often scouted stream beds and rivers for the right cobble, testing pieces with a few trial strikes. Test flakes left just on the creek bed. The rejected cores left at quarry sites are evidence of this careful selection of rock. The best quartzite has no internal cracks and is silica-rich, so it fractures predictably, despite it being extremely tough. You have to hit it hard. When I picked up this quartzite cobble, I felt the weight, I inspected for a smooth texture, and imagined the hidden tool within it waiting to emerge. The second step is percussion flaking. It's the first major phase of reduction. You take the quartzite core in your hand, and you take a hard hammerstone or an antler billet or a copper billet, and with controlled force you strike the edge of the quartzite at an angle, and a flake flies off, peeling away a sliver of that stone from the core. Each successful blow produces a bulb of percussion and a rippling surface across the flake, a signature of human craftsmanship. After that, you would do what I'm doing here, but with an antler, pressure flaking, refining the edge. After the general shape was formed by the percussion, the next step is to refine and sharpen the point, using a smaller tool. Ancient knappers would apply pressure across the edges of the stone to pop off tiny controlled flakes. And again, ancient people would be using deer antler. I'm using a copper nail here. But you take it and you press it firmly against the edge, you push in and down until it snaps right off. A thin flake is pried off. It's called pressure flaking, and it's how projectile points get their fine serrated edges and final symmetry. Each press of the antler, or copper, is turning the stone one microflake at a time to perfect its form into the final spear point. Now, quartzite can be less responsive to pressure flaking than the smoother stones like obsidian. The sandy texture might crumble instead of shearing cleanly and flaking across the piece if the tool's point is too dull or the force is misapplied. But ancient people compensated by abrading the edges to strengthen them and then using the very pointed antler tip to bite into the surface. And the result is even this rock could be shaped into an arrowhead or spear point. Working quartzite in the wilderness is as much of a spiritual journey as it is a technical act. The creek babbles nearby just as it did ages ago, and the same sun that glints off that water now catches the fresh sparkles on the newly flaked stone. In these surroundings, it's easy to feel that the boundary of past and present has blurred. I'm not alone. The spirits of ancient nappers are just out of sight here. Each time I strike the cobble, sending that flake singing, I imagine a scene here, centuries and millennia past. Perhaps a group of ancient hunters sat in that very spot I was napping on, warming themselves after a long day's hunt, crafting tools for their next adventure. Their children might have been playing in the shallows of the creek as the adults worked, all under the trees and the sky. The stone, the water, the antler tools, the wood for the fires, and even the animals they hoped to hunt with the finished spear point or arrowhead all came from the natural world in a sacred cycle. You gotta show patience, gratitude, and understanding with quartzite. If you approach the task with anger or trying to rush through it, the stone will snap. Approach it with respect and care, and it yields better. I feel a profound sense of gratitude as the flakes come off this point and the spear point takes shape. By sharing this process, I hope to inspire others to see something as common as a creek rock in a new light. The next time you wander by a stream and pick up a rock, consider that it might be the very same material used by ancient hunter-gatherers to feed their families. Imagine its potential and the hidden tool within, and the long chain of hands that could have held it. In a world of high-tech gadgets, there is profound meaning in returning to this primal craft of flint napping. It reminds us that at our core, humans have always been resourceful, deeply connected to nature, and capable of finding magic in the mundane. Go outside today, pick up a rock, and smack it.